Welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar is about standards of practice in context, part two, how we're applying them and how you can too. And I'm Fred Cohen of Fearless Security. This is an outline of today's talk. As usual, fear, uncertainty, and doubt pops up into our discussions. The piece of FUD today is it doesn't matter what I do, protection will always fail. Of course, it's true that you can never have perfect protection. That's true in all things. Nothing really can be perfect in that sense. But the real challenge that people actually face on a day-to-day basis in information protection is that no matter what they do, they get criticized. Either you have too little protection, or you're paying too much for protection, or stuff keeps happening even though I'm paying all this stuff for protection. And then there's the ultimate one. Well, but I follow best practices, and this I put into the category of FUD. We just need to stop this foolishness. I think facts bring clarity, and ignorance is not bliss. So, getting criticized is just part of the nature of security. In fact, it's part of the nature of everything. So I'd like to say just get used to it, but perhaps understanding it more clearly would help. The hamster wheel of pain. Now, this is a well-known saying in the cyber security arena or the information protection arena. And this is my characterization of the hamster wheel of pain. Other people have their own version of it. But basically, suppose you're successful and protection is effective. All right. So you have good protection. Incidents don't happen very often, or maybe never. And so the perceived need for protection, of course, goes down after 2 or 3 years if nothing happened. Why are we doing all this? Why are we spending all this money? So we keep reducing it until incidents start to happen. That's because we're paying too much, obviously, because nothing's out there. Nothing really is happening. So let's save the money. So finally, you don't have enough. And when you don't have enough, then bad things start to happen. So you need to get more. And of course, you get criticized for having spent too much before. And you get criticized for having ineffective protection after you reduce what you're spending. So my sense of it is, this is not the way to do protection. That is this feedback mechanism that's used, and that is the incidents that happen as the basis for reducing the cost, rather the incidents that don't happen as the basis for reducing the cost, and then the incidents that do happen as a basis for increasing the cost. That's really an approach that's going to fail, at least at an individual level. I think we need to move to a new model. And the model that we've adopted is the standard of practice approach. Of course, our standard of practice is not a standard. It's not something you follow. It's not like the ISO standard. It's based on the notion of reasonable and prudent practices. That is, the differentiation between being diligent and being negligent. The reasonable person principle, where that reasonable person is knowledgeable about information protection issues. I just want to point out, obviously, that our standard of practice doesn't include all of the practices that can exist. It's not the only such set of practices. It's not always applicable. It is available on open source. It's been reviewed by more and more people. To get there, you go to all.net and you click on protection. And you can see the diagram that you're seeing in many of the other presentations that we have. And it's a clickable diagram, so you can click on threats, and it'll come up and give you a sentence on threats. And in fact, here there's even a drill down on that particular one. And you can click just about anywhere in the diagram and get more information on it. If you want to look at the standards of practice, we have 3 published standards of practice out there. The archives is actually not early draft, but it's a draft. It's currently going through review process at the University of British Columbia as part of their research efforts. So we've done standard of practice assessments of several archives, and more are underway. Enterprise protection and industrial control systems are other examples. I'm just going to show you how to use this. You open the link in the new tab is usually the best way. And you have a list of basically questions in different areas and aspects, and you can click on any of these. And you can see, for example, when we talk about risk definition, that's how you see the standard of practice, and we'll talk about how we're applying it next. Just going to go back to the home page. We use the standard of practice to help our experts ask reasonably comprehensive questions when they talk to clients, to codify responses consistently in a defined language, so we're not just throwing out words with undue care. We also use this to guide decisions using the predefined bases. And identify variances from the baselines for consideration. So when we find something that's not the same as what we're used to, something that's unusual for one reason or another, or something that seems, gee, that's pretty reasonable, even though the standard of practice doesn't seem to claim it, then we try to improve. When the standard practice, of course, works, we use it, but when it doesn't, we adapt it. And if it's something that's not unique to this particular situation, but a broader applicability, then we update the standard of practice. And we've been doing this for many years. I want to talk about then how we apply it. The most common use cases we encounter are cyber insurance, oops, the news, that gets somebody worried, or distrust of insiders for one reason or another. So I'm just going to walk through them briefly and get you a sense of this. Cyber insurance is becoming the common case. I think Gartner some years ago predicted that cyber insurance was going to become a big deal in about 2015. That is, the liability was going to be attributed to parties for information-related problems. And they're starting to buy into this. Of course, we believe that in the next few years, insurance is going to become mandatory, that no board of directors or chief executive of a major organization would go without insurance for cyber-related risks. And so in cyber insurance, the insurer needs some sort of risk rating system in order to make a decision about price and about payouts and retentions, which is deductibles. So the insurer needs risk rating decisions for pools of members of the risk pools. Not so much for individual companies, although individuals have to get placed into pools so that the risk is not an individual bet on your company having a problem or not. It's rather a bet on a set of companies in the aggregate having more than so much problems or less than so much problems. Cyber insurance, as we're starting to apply the standard of practice, basically we collect data on what's insured. So insured entities, tell us what they're doing for protection using the standard of practice. And this is a requirement of insurance. That is, the insurers won't insure unless you give them information about yourself. And it's no different than fire insurance. If you don't tell them whether you have sprinklers or not, you're not going to get the rate for sprinklers. You're going to get the rate for a tinderbox, which is going to be a very high rate. Then we do future state approximation and compare that to the current situation. And we use the differential to add riders. For example, if you're doing something that's not prudent or unreasonable, I don't know, you have a million credit cards and they're readily available from your website by clicking show me the credit cards. That would be a really bad example. But if you're not checking inputs, for example, to make sure that the inputs are valid, and then giving out responses from databases based on invalid or global requests, like star, you put an asterisk in your database request and it gives you all the records or something like that. Not checking the inputs would be an example where you get a rider. It says, hey, if that's the cause of the problem, you're not covered. Of course, you have to change premiums and retentions based on these differences. So, people in high-risk businesses, they'll end up paying more. If you're out there bragging about how good your security is to the world, you're more likely to get attacked. That's what history suggests. So you'll end up with different premiums and retentions and so forth. And of course, there will be cases where they just refuse to insure. If the risk is completely unquantified, the consequences are too high. So you identify that you could lose $100 billion and there's no way to tell what you're doing because you don't know what you're doing or what have you. These are all instances where they'll refuse to insure. Then, of course, you use incident reporting and claims to measure effects. So as you have more and more things take place, those things have to get reported. The reason they have to get reported is that people that are insured have a duty to report in a timely fashion. If you don't report in a timely fashion, for example, a car accident, you wait 6 months to report that you had an accident, you're not going to get paid for that accident. It's your responsibility to notify the insurance company so they have the opportunity to mitigate the damage, both for themselves and for you. So if the insurer isn't informed in a timely fashion, you don't have a chance of getting a payout. And of course, in a cyber or an information related attack, you don't know when you first discover something what the consequences are going to be. You don't know whether this intrusion you've experienced or this outage you've experienced is going to last for a short period of time and have little consequence, or is going to end up being a small part of something much, much bigger. So if you fail to report and that's part of something bigger later on, then again, your insurance won't cover you. So almost certainly you need to report everything that you think has any possibility of having a serious negative consequence, either directly or indirectly. So because of that, you now have a reporting system where all of the insured entities are reporting all sorts of things that happen, the consequential and the inconsequential. This is something, this sort of information sharing is something we haven't had historically. We're building more information sharing, and that's a good thing. But in the insurance space, information sharing becomes a necessity, and the insurer then has the visibility to understand, based on feedback of the real things that happen, the actual consequences versus the incidents, and the application of the elements of the standard of practice. In other words, what you're doing for protection. They have the ability to correlate that information and try and make a determination or an estimate of how likely consequences are based on what's happening in the world, which they have good visibility to because of the large numbers, and what your protection scheme is, which they have good visibility as to its utility because they have, again, large numbers of this feedback. And there's another very interesting side effect, and that is that you'll get better insurance rates if you do different things. For example, and again, I'll go back to fire insurance. If you have a good fire suppression system, your insurance rates are better. Or if you have different materials that you're building out of, your insurance rates will be higher or lower. So the same thing is going to ultimately happen in the cyber arena. You're going to end up with insurance based on what protections you apply that are going to be priced so that you can make a determination. For example, maybe you say, I don't really want to have a firewall. And maybe the analysis says that a firewall, if you have one and it's properly implemented, doing the right things, that it'll reduce the cost from, say $10,000 or $20,000 per $1 million of coverage per year by $5,000 per $1 million of coverage per year. If that turned out to be the numbers, and of course we don't know what the numbers are yet, that's $5,000 per million of insurance per year. If you have $10 million of insurance coverage, that's $50,000 per year. If the firewalls cost more than the $50,000 per year, then maybe you don't want to do it because it's not cost effective. So all of a sudden you start to have a rational basis for making business decisions about protection. So that's the most interesting, in my view, current application of the standard of practice. Another one that happens a lot, let me just point out here, there's some interesting stuff on the web about this. There's a talk that I gave in China about 6 months ago, and if you look about 30 minutes into it, you'll see the part that talks about cyber insurance, and of course you can see my smiling face on video. There's also, this is an interesting slide on cyber insurance that's also from that talk, and as you go through the talk, you can look at the slides, and you'll see this feedback, again, that takes part of that. So those are, and then there's also an interesting article, 2014-10. So again, you get there by going to all.net, and you click on, let's see, 2014-10. There it is, cyber, whatever that is, insurance yet again. So you just click on that to get to the article, and you can read some more detail about the insurance space. The next one that happens quite often is oops. So we historically have gotten called in when something goes wrong, right? So something bad happened, they better find out what else to do. In some cases, something bad happens, they don't even know really what's going on. They just know bad things are happening and they want somebody to investigate. We're not, the emergency response squad. We don't come in parachutes and fix things. We're more at the strategic level, but there are people that do that, and we work with some of those and help them look at the strategic picture. So basically, something bad happened, better find out what else to do. Management is receptive to change and is willing to offer budget for it. The standard of practice then gets applied fairly rapidly. Again, it's an urgent situation. So the standard of practice can be applied in a few days. Certainly within 2 weeks, you can get a result that tells you what you might reasonably be doing and prioritizes it. And that allows you to rapidly start to act while management's willing, and also before the longer term consequences of not doing these things occurs. Another example is making major changes. So it's fairly common, for example, when you do an infrastructure rebuild, you're doing your information technology infrastructure, all your routing and switching is being redone or something like that, or a major data center shift, that at that time you want to look at security issues. It makes a lot of sense to look at your security architecture when you're changing the rest of the architecture. So, while you're at it, hey, let's review the protection issues and make sure that we don't end up retrofitting protection into this because we made some poor decision because we ignored protection in the other aspect of what's going on. So that's a very common case historically, and I think it continues to be fairly common. One of the things we're seeing more and more is that the news is starting to worry executives, top executives and board members and such, as well as, just not just the IT people who used to, be worried about these things. The media is, of course, playing up cybersecurity and failures a lot these days. So top management is very worried. Again, I talked about the potential for insurance. There's liability issues, the potential for business failure, and of course, job loss. Executives are actually losing their jobs now over major cybersecurity incidents. So they start to get more seriously concerned, and they're much more concerned lately. So they have to do something, and so the question is what? And so one of the, these processes aren't always quick, but if they want to take 6 months and get a very thorough examination for $500,000 or more, there are plenty of companies that do that. The standard of practice approach is faster. Right? It's quick and painless. It's an easy bet to make. You spend certainly less than $50,000 in almost all cases. You get the answer in a couple of weeks, and you can start working on things that are of concern to you, and then you can do the longer term strategic things as you will, and that certainly is a path forward as well. I just want to get you to a sense of this. This is the last year is my article at the end of last year for January of this year. I have a monthly article, again, it's at all.net, is the year of the Trojans and their unintended side effects. And if you just look through the list, there are lots of really ridiculous things that have been happening in the cyberspace lately. I mean, just more and more, Trojan horse hardwares, companies that provide software and so forth are being, helping others by handing your information over. SSL and encryption schemes were demonstrated to be interceptable and intercepted en route. In fact, interestingly, I sent an email off today to one of the big analyst firms, or I guess I sent it off yesterday, and they responded saying, sure, we'll look at this. And when I looked at their response, the email they got was not the same as the email I sent. Some mechanism they have, presumably for protection of some sort, altered the URLs being sent to them. So I sent them an email back explaining that those were not the URLs I sent. And this notion of interfering en route is another example of what people are doing in infrastructure today, which is at least problematic. The high speed links between major sites at Google were being tapped apparently by the NSA. All of the software at every level has been demonstrated to have been subverted in one way or another. Networks are being attacked. The physical separation of devices has been weakened. I mean, the list goes on and on of the things, and of course that leads to this fear, uncertainty, and doubt approach. Right? Everybody's getting hyperbolic about these things. And again, our approach is not that. We think that fear is not the way to resolution of these challenges. We do understand that trust is easily lost and hard to regain. And so you should read the article and look at how you might change things to not live under fear, but rather have sensible approaches. And that is something that the standard of practice approach and the architectural approach tend to address. And finally, there's insider distrust, right? Someone's worried about an inside job. They don't know what to do about it, but they think they need to do something. They feel like they need to do something. So they, strange as it may seem, they say, well, let's try this, right? It's quick, it's inexpensive, maybe it'll be helpful. And another example is executives stop believing their staff, right? They want an independent outside perspective. They don't want the harshness of an audit. They don't want the formal process of an audit. The insiders certainly don't want another audit. They have more than enough audits. And so this is another example of why people have been looking at the standard of practice approach and these sorts of assessments. And finally, the bonus reason, this is actually historically where we've generated the most application of the standard of practice. That's the new CISO wants to get a rapid understanding of what's going on in the enterprise and make changes. They don't want to wait 6 months and spend more than $250,000. They'd rather know in a month for a tenth of that much what's going on at some level and start to address it, and then they can go, drill down where they have to. And of course, you can do this yourself. Remember, this is open source. It's out there. You just open a new tab for new viewing, just like I showed you. Experience shows, and this is what the people that have tried to do this tell us, that it takes a while to go through and understand the issues. So when you do this yourself, if you really know what you're doing, of course, you can do it very efficiently. But most of the people tell us that it takes them, months to work their way through the standard of practice and apply it, piece by piece, and read and understand each of the issues and so forth. And my view, of course, it's a good thing that people are spending the time and effort to understand it and work their way through it. That's great. That means, you're taking the time to learn about the things in the standard of practice that you weren't familiar with. And frankly, nobody is familiar with everything that's included in the standard of practice. And certainly, even those that have seen it and worked on it and performed standard of practice assessments, they need to relook at these things. It's just there's too much information for anybody to know it all, and there's too much information to remember it all off the top of your head. So it's good to have a place to look. The decisions, of course, are somewhat more thoughtful. So even after they go through and understand these things, making the decisions and understanding the decisions, these are things that are more focused, and it just takes more time. And we advise them to be careful not to use it as a rote exercise. In fact, we're doing research experiments on what happens if you apply the standard of practice rote. That is, you just take whatever it says and go do it without applying expertise. It's really not designed for that. It's designed for expert interpretation. And preliminary studies so far showed that expert opinion helps in having an effective outcome. But doing it rote is not a bad thing. That is, if you just follow the conditionals and the details provided in the standard of practice, then you do get a lot of reasonable things, but you probably want to customize it to your organization. So most who try to do it this way decide it's better just to spend whatever it costs and get an assessment done over a 10-day period. Usually that's 3 months after they started the process, decided, oh my goodness, I could be here forever. So that's what we've seen historically. So what's next? That's a good question for next month. And next month, we're going to be having surprise, a guest speaker on a guest topic, and you're just going to have to wait for the announcement. So with